All right, everyone, we're going to talk about why Bitcoin is pumping today and why it can't be stopped. There are many reasons why it's pumping today, some relating to the ETF, some not. So let's go down the list. First of all, as we've mentioned in previous videos, there are many meetings between the SEC, BlackRock, Grayscale, and now other companies about the ETF. There was 3 meetings in the last week. They were obviously debating between in-kind and cash spot ETFs, and I think they've made a lot of progress. This is coupled with a rumor that they will approve an ETF on the 12th of December. Now, there are no foundations to that rumor, but with the progress that they have been making, and with the SEC basically losing the Grayscale lawsuit, being forced by the court to re-examine their stance on the Bitcoin ETF, it does seem more and more likely. And of course, there's always the speculation of insider trading pre-ETF approval. So I do think these meetings and these rumors of a December 12th ETF are kind of fueling the fire. Now, even if it doesn't get approved on the 12th of December, which by the way is the same day as the FOMC meeting, which should boost Bitcoin again by stabilizing the economy with no interest rate hikes. Even if it doesn't get approved then, it will get approved in January, which is the expected date that we always had. So it's really not a big deal. The SEC is definitely on the back foot. Gary Gensler is crying in the corner. And they're going to have to agree to have a Bitcoin ETF. Plus, because there's already dissension within the SEC itself. Plus, the fact that the courts have completely turned against the SEC, and they favor the companies that are filing these specific lawsuits. So basically, like the SEC isn't going to really have that much of a choice whether or not to approve an ETF. It's kind of almost out of their hands now, and they've run out of excuses, and that's why they're doing these meetings. Let me remind you guys that, on previous filings in previous years, they did not have any of these meetings because they just went radio silent until they said, no, we're not going to approve. So I do actually think that indeed, the Grayscale lawsuit has had a big effect on their decision making because they know that they are not able to hide behind some pretense of some BS reason, and they're going to have to come up with a real reason, which they don't have. And the fact that they've let a lot of futures ETFs through definitely does not help them at all because futures and spot ETFs follow the same underlying asset, which means they're the same the vast majority of the time. And let's not forget, the SEC is facing sanctions, which does not improve their status. A judge, for those of you that didn't watch my last few videos, did just sanction the SEC. Well, he didn't sanction them, but he threatened to sanction them because they provided false and misleading information that froze a company's assets, and the company was able to prove that those allegations were false and that the SEC lawyers knew ahead of time that it was false. Every time you do something like this, your standing with the judges and the courts decreases, and the SEC's credibility with the courts and judges, if you haven't been paying attention for the last year and a half, is at rock bottom. A lot of these judges are very, very skeptical of SEC reasoning, and now they're just outright threatening to sanction the SEC lawyers, which means the lawyers will probably not be so brazen when they come up against the court. Because I think some of these government lawyers think that they are invincible because they represent the government, but now they know that it's not true and the courts aren't in their favor. So like they're not as willing to as much to lie for the SEC to get their way. So the regulation by enforcement, I do think, is coming to an end. The SEC is randomly suing a lot of companies with losing strategies to get as much as they can before they ultimately lose everything. But with every one of these lawsuits that they bring up that's kind of like frivolous, their standing decreases. So while it might extend their lifeline for no ETFs and basically suing these companies, it does decrease their credibility overall with the court. And that's why they're losing case after case after case. And sooner or later, they will not be able to go after crypto companies. And the thing is, after that Ripple lawsuit, you can see they're not actually going after companies. They are going after exchanges for a one-shot kill. But in return, that gives the exchanges the opportunity to return that one-shot kill back to them, and that's what's happening. The Kraken case is basically based on the same losing premises as the rest of the cases because the SEC has not been able to prove, because Congress has not made a rule that cryptos are indeed securities. And the chorus is rising in Congress with both Democratic and Republican congressmen saying that the SEC is doing its overreach. In fact, it was a Democratic congressman this time that said Gary Gensler is playing much more the part of politician and regulator than regulator, and he's just a politician, basically like posing as a regulator, which is not a big endorsement of Gary Gensler. I think everyone is well aware that Gary Gensler is trying to aim for the Secretary of Treasury position, and they're not very friendly towards that because he has not done a good job as a regulator, no matter which way you slice it. So I think like all that coming out in the last few days is why Bitcoin is rising. Like, people are bearish on the SEC, which means they're bullish on crypto. The rumors are boosting up, the meetings are boosting it up. But there is also other solid reasons why Bitcoin is rising. MicroStrategy, for instance, has bought 600 million Bitcoin $600 million worth of Bitcoin. And it is the biggest purchase since February of 2021 when we were still in the bull market. They now have about $6.5 billion worth of Bitcoin, but this is like 1/10 of their Bitcoin buys. So MicroStrategy co-founder Michael Saylor has once again bought $600 million of Bitcoin at this price. Now, obviously, they are constantly raising money, selling equity to buy Bitcoin, because MicroStrategy's entire basically business at this point is Bitcoin buying. So if you buy MicroStrategy stock, you are essentially buying Bitcoin. Yes, I do realize they sell software, but no one cares about their software sales. The vast bulk of their business is Bitcoin buying. In fact, Michael Saylor stepped down as the main guy of MicroStrategy's business to focus on buying Bitcoin as a business, which entails basically raising money to buy more Bitcoin. So he's realistically still the main guy there because their entire business is predicated on buying ever more Bitcoin. So think about that for a moment. Like the big buyers are still buying. BlackRock and Fidelity is seeding, and the biggest holders of Bitcoin are trying to accumulate more and more. They're not selling, they're buying. And because of that, there's a lot of buying pressure and upwards pressure on Bitcoin. A $600 million buy, even if it's over time, can basically compensate for a lot of selling pressure. And these big whales are not letting Bitcoin fall by buying ever more and more. Michael Saylor does not seem to intend to actually sell any Bitcoin at any time. So it's just going to keep going up. And it is the bulk of the company's business. And if you look at the volume of Bitcoin, it is slowly starting to rise again. And we're going to see why it's a little different from the volume of the last bull cycle. If you look at this year, if you actually look at 2021 to 2023, if you just look at the 1-year graph, you can see that the volume kind of like died in the summer here. And now we're having a little bit more volume, average maybe 10 billion more a day than we did in the summer. So the thing is, like the summer, we basically were at the least amount of volume or the lowest volume around July, August area, and that's when Bitcoin went down to 25. But ever since around September, you can see the volume down here has been slightly rising. We're not quite yet at where we were at the beginning of the year, but there's a reason for that, and that's because more people are self-custodying their coins. Remember, in the middle of this year, there were a couple of there were a couple of exchange hacks, and people lost a lot of trust in the exchanges, so they started putting Bitcoin in their own wallets. Well, if you don't have Bitcoin on the exchanges, that doesn't necessarily mean you're selling Bitcoin. In fact, it means you're not selling Bitcoin, but it also means you're less likely to trade Bitcoin. So even if the interest in Bitcoin remained the same, the volume would actually drop. And now the volume's going up. That, I think, indicates more of a buying pressure than selling pressure for Bitcoin. So the volume during this bull run may not look as big as the volume in the last bull run in terms of Bitcoin, but it will be just as many active buyers and sellers. It's just that the people that have large amounts of Bitcoin have put it in their own wallet instead of Coinbase or Binance. And because of that, they're not making wash trades as often. So a lot of the volume that's going to die is the wash trading volume right now. And I think you're seeing like the volume without so much wash trading at this point. The wash trading obviously doesn't do anything because you're just buying and selling at the exact same price. It just makes it look like there's more volume, and we're not really going to have that much in this bull run, but that does not mean the amount of buyers and sellers is going to be less, the ones that are actually actively in the market. Wash traders aren't really actively in the market since they're just providing kind of like empty volume. So we'll see a lot more non-empty volume taking up a bigger and bigger share of the volume. I think this is overall good for the industry, and I think Bitcoin can pump just as high, if not higher. And more or less, I don't see any of these factors going away, whether it's Saylor buying more, because you know he's going to buy more, whether it's BlackRock and Fidelity seeding the ETF, they're going to need to seed even more once people actually start buying their ETF, because remember, customers aren't buying yet. The SEC, I think, is just digging themselves a deeper and deeper hole with all these lawsuits. So that's not getting any better for the SEC. And of course, like, you know, the volume rising, it's going to continue to rise into next year. You add on to that the halving coming in March, April. And you also kind of like add to that, you know, just the amount of ETF buys there's going to be and like all the new products coming in. And you can see that it's going to be pretty unstoppable. It's like a snowball that's slowly rolling downhill and starting to gain momentum. And there's really not much that can stand in the way because all the obstacles like the SEC that were standing in the way are being cleared. Yes, the CFTC and the Treasury are coming in, but remember, they only control over the United States, and the world is not united in its crusade against Bitcoin. In fact, many of the countries, especially people like places like Abu Dhabi in the Middle East, are very, very friendly towards Bitcoin. Obviously, countries like Russia are going to be friendly towards Bitcoin because they need another outlet outside the US dollar. China, I think they're coming around to it, even though the digital yuan they're trying to make the digital yuan dominant, but their currency isn't going to do too well. So realistically, like there's more and more factors playing in favor of Bitcoin rather than against it, especially going into next year. None of these factors are going away. Interest rates are going to come down, and that's another big factor towards the second half of next year. So like you can see like us rising somewhat slowly until like June or July, and then they announce interest rate hike cuts. We might pause for a little while, but by like July, August, September of next year, we should be rolling once again. So that's what I have. That's what I think. Let me know what you think. Like and subscribe. Hit that bell notifications button, and I will see you guys later.